Hey everybody, welcome back to another Nature's Always Right episode. Today I'm standing in the Bootstrap Farmer greenhouse to talk to you guys about making soil blocks. In this video, we're going to talk about the soil block mix that I use for making soil blocks. I also use this for plug trays and my new Never Sink Farm wind strip trays as well. We'll be talking about the mix that I use, the different amendments that I add, how I strain it, how to get it really perfect and ready before we go and make the soil blocks. And the next video is going to be all about the techniques for making the soil blocks, the trays that I use, and some different things that are really important for blocking the soil blocks. In another future episode, I'm going to be comparing the wind strip trays here to soil blocks that you make with the little blocker here. The big reason that we want to use soil blocks is because it allows for air pruning. And what air pruning does, when roots hit air, they'll actually die and send a response back to create more capillary roots. And a bunch of these smaller roots are much stronger than the really long roots that wind round and around. So when you've ever seen like a pot, or if you've ever used plug trays, you'll notice that your roots will get really long and just wrap around and around and around the plug tray. And that's because they have no place to go. They want to keep going down, but they can't, so they just keep spiralizing around in that plug tray. And this is a much more unhealthy root system. Now, the root system for soil block, this is still a pretty young plant, but when the soil blocks come out and they hit air, they'll actually die. And usually what you'll see on a more developed plant, you'll see root structure all around the outside of the plant and underneath as well. And if you were to go inside of this block, you would see a lot of smaller roots on the inside. So what this allows is for a really healthy plant, the healthiest plant in my opinion. And what will happen is you'll have far less transplant shock. You can put them into the ground and they'll just go. I also like the soil blocks because they're really easy to plant. You don't have to pop them out of a tray. You just boom and go. And I'm going to show you some techniques on how to make the plug trays easier to pop out. Something unique about plants is that they will start to measure out the size pot or plug tray that they're in, and they'll start to believe that that is their permanent home. So by giving them the air pruned area, it allows for them to be much more healthier in the long run, and helping them to develop a better root structure overall, so that when you plant it out in the ground, there's much less transplant shock and the plant can just take off right away and be as healthy as possible. And when it's as healthy as possible, it has the ability to resist pest and disease much more easily. So now these trays, the 1020s, they're not the best to use for soil blocks because you want the air pruning effect. These are the best kind to use. They have a mesh bottom. You can also get them in a 1020 size as well. I'm just using these because it's what I had, and they still work really well. You still get air pruning effect, but not the full effect, which is why you want to use these as well. And then you want to have these on a table that have airflow as well. So doing them on a rack like that is really good. If you just put this on a flat table, you kind of lose the air pruning effect on the bottom. So just to let you guys know about that. Down in the video description, I'll put all of the tools and the ratios and the ingredients that I used. I always put a lot of different information for you guys down in the video description, the parts that I use, where to buy them, any extra information, links to the websites I've been talking about, so go ahead and check that out. Also in the comments section, I always put a table of contents in my videos now. So if you want to just skip ahead to something that you're more interested in, you can kind of see the different parts of the video, click the link, and then go straight there. Also, please consider supporting me on Patreon or donating through PayPal, as all of my videos are free and I'm providing you guys some really excellent information that I hope is going to save you guys quite a bit of time in figuring this stuff out. I put a lot of detail into my videos to try to help you the best I possibly can. I'd love any support that you could give me, as taking the time to make these videos takes me away from farming and making money that way. And YouTube unfortunately doesn't pay us very much in the form of ads. Okay, so let's get into it. Let's go talk about the ingredients I use for my soil block and plug tray mix and the ratios that I use. We're going to be using 3 different ingredients for this mix, and what we need is a measuring cup. And I'm going to give you a ratio so that you can use whatever measuring cup that you'd like. I like to use a 5-gallon bucket because it will make me about 6 10 by 20 trays or about 300 soil blocks. I mix it in a wheelbarrow to make it really easy, and I dump that mix into a tote that I can move around to make it really ergonomic for me to make the blocks. So the 3 ingredients that I use is my compost that I make, peat moss, and vermiculite or perlite depending on the season. So I'm also going to give you some alternatives to those ingredients as well. So for peat moss, you could also use coco coir, and a replacement for perlite would be pumice stone, or you could even use sand. The difference between perlite and vermiculite: perlite allows for more airflow and more water to drain through it. Vermiculite retains a lot more moisture. It still does allow airflow, but it retains much more moisture, not as much airflow as perlite. So I like to use perlite in the winter when things are staying a bit more wet, especially if I have any seedlings outside. That way they drain out easier and have more airflow, and it keeps them healthier. In the summer, I really like to use vermiculite so that it's retaining the moisture. I notice I don't have to water the soil blocks as often or worry about them as much because the retention of water is so much greater. For reference, the compost is for nutrients, of course. It's holding water. The peat moss is to help it kind of congeal more and help the blocks stick together. And then the perlite vermiculite is for airflow and also water retention. So I'm using the ingredients that I have access to and that are cheap for me to buy. So the next super important thing that you need for making soil blocks or plug trays is you need to strain your compost. This is gonna make a really fine, beautiful seed mix, and it's also going to give you a much better germination rate. All this is 1/4-inch hardware cloth and some wood supports that I put in there to make it stronger. Very simple, and it fits right on top of my wheelbarrow. Now this is not the most efficient way to strain the compost. I've actually seen somebody who used a modified cement mixer and a cylindrical trommel to filter out the bigger stuff in the compost. It's something I want to build at some point. I just haven't done it yet. Luckily, I don't make large amounts of transplants, so it's not a huge time kill to strain it by hand like this. If you're a small home gardener, this is fantastic. You just need something like this, super simple. On a larger scale though, I recommend the cement mixer technique, and I'll post a link in the video description to show you guys somebody who's done it that way, and it's really cool. So the ratio that we're gonna be doing for the soil blocks and the plug trays is 1 part compost, 1 part peat moss, and a 1/2 part perlite or vermiculite. So I'll be straining the compost out first. You can only do so much at a time. And the drier that your compost is, the better. Obviously you don't want your compost to completely dry out, but if it's sopping wet, it will have a problem going through the 1/4-inch hardware cloth. So to make it easier in the beginning, I like to just shake it. And then once I've gotten some of the weight off of it, what works really well is shaking it back and forth. And then some of the particles are a little bigger. Then I'll come in with my hands and kind of push it down and push it through in a circular motion like this. And you can see this compost is kind of wet, so it's making it more difficult. So the last little bit, you kind of got to do by hand. So the rest is mostly rocks and stuff. So what I do is I'll just save this, and I just use it as like a mulch for my trees. So now you can see what we have here. It's a very finely sifted compost. So now we're gonna do the same thing with the peat moss, because peat moss usually will have sticks and twigs, and or sometimes it clumps together in big chunks, which is what we don't want. And I like to do this next to my compost pile so that whatever I spill, I can just dump back into my pile and it doesn't matter. And I'm not losing anything. So at this point, this is where I would add in any other amendments that I'd like to add. and I believe that giving the plants their entire spectrum of minerals and nutrients from the beginning of their life all the way through to the adult stage is what's going to allow them to have the best health possible. And when they have the best health, they're able to resist pests and disease. So one of the things that I add is just some kelp meal. And I'm just doing small amounts. I'm just doing like a little handful here. I don't measure anything. So the kelp meal is a ton of different nutrients. The kelp meal takes a little bit longer to break down, but it's in the soil block so that when I go and take it out and I plant in the ground out there, it's already got the kelp meal. It's already partially broken down. The microbes are going to go to work to break down even more. This is micronized azomite. I'm going to put links to the description below. I'm putting links to the best prices that I found as well. Azomite has about 70 different trace minerals, and it's mined from a special mine here in America where it's a clean mine. There's no contaminants or things like that. They mine it very responsibly as well, and it's just a volcanic ash deposit, and that's where the minerals come from. So those are easy. Those are ones I would highly recommend everybody do. This is something a little extra. This is biochar, and biochar is charcoal that has been inoculated with beneficial microbes, fungi, and nutrients. And I'm gonna have a video coming out in the future about how I make this and how I do it. I did do a little vlog post making it because I make this in a campfire right now. So it's pretty easy to make, but there's a much more efficient, better way to make it, and I'll be showing that in a future video. But this is basically an inoculant. It's a way to bring restorative health to soil. So I'm starting to use that now in my soil mixes. Something else that you could add if you wanted, I'm not going to, just because I'm just going to be planting some flowers, some kind of backup plants for myself with this mix here. This is just a simple 2-2-2 or a 2-2-1 fertilizer. It's just an organic fertilizer. It uses alfalfa meals, bone meal, feather meal, rock dust, things like that. So it's just very light fertilizer to give an extra boost. But my compost is pretty good, so I've been pretty happy with the results of using just the compost. So I'm saving my fertilizer for other things. But this is called the Roots Organic Foundation fertilizer. Okay, so these are the dry amendments I'm going to be adding. I'll show you guys a wet amendment, my worm and compost tea that I'm going to add later. So I like to mix in at this stage just because it makes it easy to kind of pre-mix the amendments in there, and they don't blow away in the wind. I'm just kind of breaking up the larger chunks with my hand, and then from there, this is really easy to strain by shaking it back and forth. And you'll see there's a lot of these larger chunks. I just come in with my hand and push down on the top of them, and they break apart very easily. So as you can see, there's a bunch of small twigs and stuff that are in the peat moss. I want to get rid of those. Now, since we're in spring going into summer, I'm going to use vermiculite. So I need a half bucket. Now, vermiculite is a lot more expensive than perlite, so you may opt to just use perlite, and that would be completely fine. Now, for mixing everything together, the pitchfork is really good. Makes it really easy to just blend everything, and there's a lot less resistance, so there's less work. But I always finish with a flat edge shovel so that I can scrape the bottom of the wheelbarrow to ensure that everything is mixing really well. Because one of the keys to getting a really good soil block or plug tray mix is that all the layers that we made, the peat moss, the vermiculite, and the compost, is mixed thoroughly. Now you could also use this mix for a potting mix as well. For pots, a lot of people will just use the perlite, which I'd recommend because it's cheaper. And for like a straight potting mix, you could even add, up to 3/4 of a bucket or a full bucket of perlite, depending on what you're planting. If you're planting more of like a cactus or a succulent, things like that, they're gonna want more airflow. So a whole bucket of perlite would be better. Okay, check it out. So here is the final product, and it's amazing. So this is better than anything you could buy in the store, and we made it at home. So normally I dump this entire wheelbarrow into my tote here, but I'm gonna split this up. I'm just gonna, because I want to use some of my never sink wind strip trays for the demonstration. So I'm not gonna dump the whole thing. I'm gonna dump about half in there to make soil blocks, and the rest will be saved for the wind strips. So now we got in our easily movable tote, and it's not wet yet. So now let's go get this thing wet. Pretty much the most important part of soil blocks is the right amount of moisture. So if you'd like to see how to make the soil blocks, get the right moisture, I'm going to show you all the different technique, what trays to use and everything. Go ahead and click on the next video. So I'll do a more in-depth talk all about the soil blocks.